The lights of the New York studio burned hot overhead, casting a soft glow on Stephen Colbert's signature smirk. The audience cheered as he paced the stage, cue cards in hand, warming them up with trademark sarcasm. "Tonight," he announced, "we have someone straight from the Trump machine, a name trending on X for all the wrong reasons. Let's welcome Karoline Leavitt." Behind the scenes, Karoline adjusted the collar of her tailored navy blazer. Her cross necklace glinted subtly under the lights, but her expression was steel. She had done this before, faced skeptics, critics, and headlines designed to shred her. But this was different. Tonight she was stepping into Colbert's turf, where every word could be twisted into a punchline. Her aide whispered, "You don't have to go hard. Just defend yourself." Karoline's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to defend. I came to reveal." The curtain lifted. Stephen leaned forward, his voice syrupy. "Miss Leavitt, welcome. Or should I say, welcome back to the 1950s? Laughter erupted from the crowd. Karoline smiled, sharp as glass. "Glad to be here, Stephen. But it's 2025, and maybe you're the one still stuck in the past." The air changed. The crowd shifted. Colbert raised a brow. He moved in, fast. "You talk a lot about values, faith, family, freedom. But don't you think that language is a little out of touch?" Boom. There it was. The line that would define the night. He expected her to deflect, laugh nervously, maybe fumble. Instead, Karoline straightened in her chair. "Stephen," she said, "you think faith is out of touch. You think patriotism is outdated. But maybe the reason so many Americans feel lost is because people like you decided what matters doesn't matter anymore." Colbert blinked. She wasn't done. "You stand on this stage, calling half the country backwards, clinging to scripts written by writers paid to mock real pain. You think it's funny that my grandfather worked 3 jobs to put food on the table? You think it's funny that I pray before I speak? Go ahead. Laugh. But every time you laugh at me, you're laughing at the people who built this nation brick by brick. And they're watching tonight." Silence fell. Even the cameras hesitated, as if unsure whether to zoom in or cut away. Colbert opened his mouth, but the applause started. Quiet at first, then building. Karoline didn't flinch, and just like that, the narrative shifted. The sound engineer tapped his headset twice in disbelief. Did she just flip the room?" he whispered to the producer. On stage, Stephen Colbert's jaw was still half open, just enough to catch a fly. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. This was supposed to be comedic chess, not a political ambush. But Karoline hadn't come to play. Stephen finally let out a chuckle. "Well, I guess you've memorized your lines pretty well." Karoline's smile didn't fade. "The difference is, Stephen, mine aren't written for applause. They're lived." The crowd stirred. This wasn't the Karoline they'd seen on split-screen cable panels. She wasn't defensive. She was surgical. Colbert leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control. Okay, let's get real. You're on TV defending a man who once said he could shoot someone and not lose voters. Don't you see how that's cultish?" Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know what's cultish? Applauding someone not because they're right, but because they said something snarky that made you feel morally superior for 5 seconds. The audience shifted again. Nervous laughs, scattered claps. "See, you've got this gig figured out," she continued. "Mock anyone who disagrees with you. Smirk. Get a few retweets, then go home and tell yourself you're the good guy. Meanwhile, regular people can't afford eggs, can't speak freely, and can't trust the institutions you spent years defending. Because your version of truth only works in your bubble." Stephen tried to interrupt. "Now hold on." "No!" Karoline cut in, voice rising just enough to dominate. "You hold on. You invited me here to be a target, not a guest. You expected a headline you could use to boost your ratings, but what you didn't expect is that someone like me could stand up to someone like you. And maybe that's your biggest blind spot." The crowd gasped. The camera zoomed in on Colbert's face. For a split second, the king of late night looked like the student, not the teacher. A woman in the audience stood up and clapped. Others followed. Not all, but enough. The producer watching backstage swore under his breath. This wasn't going to be a comedy reel. This was going to be national conversation. And Karoline knew it. She leaned forward slightly, delivering the final punch of the segment like a lawyer giving closing arguments. You think this is just another taping? I think it's time someone said it loud. This country deserves more than punchlines. It deserves truth. And I didn't come here for your approval. I came here because someone had to say it where it matters. The lights dimmed for commercial. Colbert sipped his water with shaky hands. Karoline? She sat back, steady as ever. This wasn't a debate. It was a turning point. The commercial break couldn't have come soon enough for Stephen Colbert. As the stage lights dimmed, he turned away from the cameras, swallowing hard. His fingers fiddled with the blue note cards on his lap. Cards that were supposed to steer the conversation, not get shredded on live television. Karoline Leavitt, meanwhile, remained composed. No makeup retouch, no water sip. She just sat there, legs crossed, eyes still calm, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Backstage, one of the producers leaned toward Colbert's earpiece. Stephen, pivot hard next segment, shift the mood, we're losing it. He nodded slightly, but his hands betrayed the calm. This wasn't just a rough night. This was a narrative slipping through his fingers. As the cameras turned back on, the crowd gave a hesitant round of applause, some eager for fireworks, others unsure what they'd just witnessed. Colbert tried to lighten the air. Well, that was intense. But hey, we can all laugh about it later, right? A few awkward chuckles echoed. Karoline didn't blink. That's your instinct, to turn pain into punchlines. Stephen tilted his head, half curious, half defensive. You think I'm mocking people? Karoline leaned forward, her voice even. I think your show has power, and instead of using it to bridge divides, you use it to draw lines. You don't joke about politicians. You joke about their voters. You don't challenge policies. You insult people who dare think differently. The audience went still. She continued, tone precise. My father watches this show. A veteran, a machinist, worked 2 decades at a steel plant before the factory moved overseas. He used to laugh at your jokes. Now he doesn't watch at all, because somewhere along the way, you stopped being funny and started being cruel. Stephen blinked, stunned. No one had ever said it quite like that. Not on his set. You say I'm out of touch? Karoline said. You sit in a Manhattan studio surrounded by writers with the same opinions. I sit at diners in New Hampshire listening to people with broken dreams and bruised dignity. And you want to tell me I don't get struggle? Stephen looked away, almost embarrassed. The crowd didn't know how to respond. Some murmured, others shifted in their seats. Then, Karoline delivered the line that would break the internet by morning. You don't understand America, Stephen. You understand applause. And those aren't always the same thing. The audience gasped. The stage manager signaled from behind the camera, stretch the segment. Don't cut. Colbert adjusted his glasses, clearly rattled. You think I don't love this country? Karoline held her gaze. I think you love the sound of your own voice more. The silence that followed wasn't dead air. It was revelation. Karoline didn't flinch. She knew what she came here to do, and as the segment neared its end, the headlines were already writing themselves. The moment the words, "You love the sound of your own voice more," left Karoline's mouth, a ripple moved through the studio, not just from the audience, but from every producer, camera op, and assistant who realized this was no longer just a segment. It was a media event. Stephen Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His trademark smirk faltered, and for a second, the studio lights seemed to dim under the weight of what had just been said. Karoline leaned back in her chair, calm, unmoved. Her silence said what words couldn't. I meant every word. Behind the cameras, the control room lit up. Clip that. Title it. Karoline Leavitt says what everyone's been thinking. Push it to socials in 30 seconds. Another producer chimed in. Make sure it hits the trending tab before the segment ends. This is going viral. And it did. By the time the next segment aired, The clip had already been reposted by a dozen political accounts, 2 comedian influencers, and even a former White House advisor. On X, the hashtags Leavitt lands it and Colbert silenced were trending side by side. Even neutral users were sharing the video not because they agreed, but because they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Back on set, Colbert tried to pivot. So, tell us, Karoline, what's your hope for the country? Besides, burning down late-night TV? She didn't blink. That people start realizing the joke's been on them, that they're not crazy for feeling ignored, and that being mocked by celebrities isn't patriotism. It's bullying with a smile. The audience grew louder. Some clapped, others murmured, but no one could deny the shift in energy. Colbert glanced nervously at the monitor. His writers were already reworking the final bit. The closer, originally a Trump joke, had just been cut. Karoline continued, her voice calm but loaded. You say I'm out of touch, but I've stood in food pantry lines with single moms. I've spoken with veterans whose benefits are delayed, and I've prayed with families who lost sons to fentanyl. What I haven't done is sit behind a desk, laugh at them, and call it progress. Stephen's laugh came out forced. Wow, you've got the whole speech ready. No, Karoline said. I have reality. You've just got punchlines. A beat of silence followed. No one moved. No one laughed. And then, a slow clap began. Not from the back, not from the conservative side, but from a young woman in the middle row wearing a Yale sweatshirt. Others followed. Not overwhelming, not unanimous, but undeniable. This wasn't about politics anymore. Karoline had just drawn a line between the stage and the real world, and millions were about to cross it. Karoline stood firm under the heat of the studio lights. The applause had simmered into a loaded silence, one where every breath felt amplified, every gesture watched. This wasn't just TV anymore. This was a confrontation with the culture itself. Stephen straightened in his chair. His smile returned, but this time it felt tight, like a man gripping the wheel in a storm. So now you're telling me, what? Comedians are the enemy? That we can't joke anymore? Karoline's answer was quiet, almost too quiet, but that made it hit harder. No, she said. You can joke, but when the only people you joke about are the ones who can't fight back, it's not comedy. It's cowardice. You could have heard a pin drop. The air in the studio pulsed with a new kind of energy, no longer just entertainment or partisanship, but reckoning. Karoline wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. She had something Stephen couldn't match in that moment. Moral clarity. She turned slightly toward the audience, her voice calm but focused. You call it satire. But I've watched you laugh at veterans who support Trump. I've seen you mock small-town Americans who didn't go to Ivy League schools. You once called half this country backwards, and the only punchline was their faith, their values, and their pain. Stephen lifted a finger as if to interrupt, but she wasn't done. I grew up in a town where people still hang flags because they love their country, not because they're trying to make a statement. I worked 2 jobs in college, not for a hashtag, but to help my parents keep their house. And now I sit at the White House, not because of privilege, but because I refuse to be the punchline. Gasps, scattered applause. Even a few people in the production crew nodded. Stephen forced a smile. You're a great storyteller. I'll give you that. Karoline leaned forward, locking eyes. That's the difference between us, Stephen. You tell jokes that help people forget the truth. I tell stories that help people remember it. The audience erupted, not in blind support, but in stunned acknowledgement. She had flipped the script in real time. The traditional power dynamic, the host, the guest, the audience, had melted, and in its place was a raw, undeniable moment of truth. In the control room, a producer muttered, "We can't cut this. This is the show now." Meanwhile, on social media, Karoline's soundbites were already being clipped and reposted by both left-wing and right-wing accounts. Even neutral outlets like The Hill and Axios were weighing in. Karoline Leavitt breaks the format on Colbert was trending before the credits even rolled. And then something unexpected happened. A text buzzed on Stephen's phone. From a friend at another network. "She's not just a guest anymore. You just made her a movement." Karoline sat back, composed, with the calm of someone who knew she hadn't just survived a confrontation. She had owned it, and the world was watching. By the time the show went off air, Karoline's name was already climbing the trending charts. Clips of her calm dismantling of Stephen's sarcasm were everywhere. X, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, even Facebook groups that hadn't posted political content in years were sharing the moment with captions like, "She came armed with truth," and "That wasn't a guest, she was a reckoning." Backstage, Karoline wasn't gloating. She was scrolling silently, watching how quickly the internet was reacting. A junior staffer from the show walked up, hesitant. "Just wanted to say, that was impressive." She nodded, gave a half smile. "Thanks. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just didn't want to let him rewrite the story." Meanwhile, Stephen sat alone in his dressing room, the glow of his phone lighting his face. The comments weren't what he was used to. Out of touch. Weak response. "You let her walk all over you." He scrolled further. She didn't yell. She didn't insult. She just told the truth. He tossed the phone on the couch and leaned forward, staring at the floor. On Capitol Hill the next morning, conservative leaders were already quoting her. Charlie Kirk tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt showed what courage looks like on national TV." Even independents and moderates were chiming in. "I don't agree with everything she said, but she made Colbert look small." At the White House, Karoline's inbox exploded. Emails from supporters, interview requests, even a message from someone unexpected. A Hollywood actor who leaned liberal but respected the guts it took to face Stephen like that. "We need more honest people, even when I don't agree with their politics. You've got my attention." Karoline replied simply, "Appreciate the respect. It starts with listening." Meanwhile, the segment became the subject of a heated roundtable on CNN. One anchor said, "Was Stephen Colbert finally outmatched?" Another replied, "She came with facts, not fury. That's what made it effective." The Atlantic ran an op-ed that afternoon, "When Satire Met Reality and Lost." It broke down the interview beat by beat, concluding that Karoline had done something rare, held her ground in enemy territory without throwing punches, only reflections. Stephen's team went into damage control. But there wasn't much to control. No scandal, no meltdown, just the undeniable feeling that the narrative had shifted. Karoline wasn't just a political spokesperson anymore. She was the story. And this wasn't the end of her media moment. It was just the beginning. The next morning, Karoline stood by the window of her DC apartment, the sun casting sharp rays across the hardwood floor. She was still in her robe, sipping black coffee, her phone buzzing nonstop. Overnight, her followers had doubled. Conservative influencers were calling her the calm conservative the left fears. Even people outside the political sphere were reaching out. Journalists, podcasters, CEOs, pastors. She tapped open one email from a former high school teacher. "I watched you last night. You didn't flinch. You didn't fall. I'm proud to say I once taught you." Karoline smiled faintly. The truth was she hadn't slept. Not from anxiety, but from adrenaline. What she had felt on that stage wasn't nervousness. It was purpose. Meanwhile, Stephen Colbert's team held a quiet crisis meeting at the network's Midtown offices. One producer nervously paced the floor. "She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She just made him look out of touch, and now it's everywhere." Another added, "We underestimated her." Again. Stephen, seated quietly, looked older than usual. For the first time in a long while, the laughs weren't enough. That afternoon, Karoline accepted an interview with the Daily Signal. It was a sharp contrast to the late-night glitz. Here, she dove into policy, border control, education reform, the dangers of media narratives. But at the end, the host leaned in and asked, "What made you not back down?" Karoline's voice was steady. Because I've been underestimated my whole life. They said I was too young, too inexperienced, too conservative. But I know what I believe, and I won't apologize for it. That quote hit social media like lightning. Clips from the Daily Signal crossed platforms. TikTok creators used her line in edits. They said I was too young became a rally cry for Gen Z conservatives. Even liberal commenters admitted grudging respect. Say what you want, but she stood her ground. Back at CBS headquarters, Stephen walked past a staff monitor showing the latest engagement metrics. Karoline's interview had outperformed their show's clips. That stung. Still, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. He smirked and muttered, "Let's see if she can hold up twice." But Karoline wasn't chasing rematches. She was chasing meaning. Later that evening, she joined a virtual town hall with young conservatives across the Midwest. Her voice carried through their laptop speakers not as a politician, but as someone real. Don't wait for permission to speak up. If someone calls you out of touch, remind them. Being grounded is not the same as being lost. They erupted in applause even through screens. It wasn't just about Stephen anymore. Karoline had sparked something bigger. A new chapter in political authenticity, where calm didn't mean weak, and facts cut deeper than fury. She wasn't just trending, she was shifting the tone. A few days after the now infamous Colbert interview, Karoline was invited to speak at a leadership conference in Austin. The event, normally a dry rotation of policy panels and think tank presentations, had sold out overnight, just because her name was on the roster. The room was packed, buzzing with quiet excitement as she walked on stage in a soft yellow blazer and jeans, unassuming, yet unmistakably confident. No teleprompter, no notes, just her voice. "Some people think youth means ignorance," she began, her eyes scanning the room. "But I've found it can mean clarity, because we're not afraid to ask the questions others stopped asking." The crowd was still at first, unsure if she was going to dive into red meat talking points. But then she shifted. "They called me out of touch," she said, pausing. "But I was raised in a working-class town. My dad fixed engines. My mom worked double shifts. We didn't dine with celebrities. We prayed before meals. We weren't out of touch. We were in the thick of it." That landed like a punch. In the front row, a pair of donors nodded slowly. In the back, a group of college students stood up and clapped quietly. Karoline had no need to shout. Her story did the shouting for her. Meanwhile, across the country, Stephen Colbert was back in his studio. The laughter returned, but the shadow of that interview lingered. His writers had tried to craft a comeback bit, but nothing stuck. Everything felt hollow. The audience still laughed, but not with the same fire. That same evening, Karoline received an unexpected message through her office line. A woman named Lisa, mid-50s, from Ohio, a nurse. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, voice cracking over the speaker. "I don't agree with everything politically, but when you talked about being overlooked, that hit me. I've worked 30 years and I've never been invited to speak. But you stood there for people like me. I just needed to say that." Karoline didn't respond for a long moment. Then she softly said, "You're exactly why I do this." By the end of that week, Time magazine published a feature titled, "When Experience Met Conviction: The Rise of Karoline Leavitt." The article was balanced, no fluff, no attacks. But it was clear, she had shifted something. Stephen had mocked her as inexperienced, but she had revealed something deeper than experience. She had authenticity. And in an era drowning in performance, authenticity was power. Back in her apartment, Karoline sat quietly that night. The city hummed beneath her window. The notifications kept buzzing. But for a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the silence say more than any headline ever could. She hadn't just survived Colbert. She had redefined what survival looked like. By the end of the week, something unexpected started to happen. Not just among Karoline's supporters, but across the broader media landscape. Clips from the Colbert interview began surfacing on platforms not usually kind to conservative voices. But this time, they weren't mocking her. They were analyzing her. One popular YouTube commentator, known for skewering both sides, paused mid-video and said, "Look, I'm no MAGA fan, but that woman came prepared. She didn't rant. She didn't scream. She looked him in the eye and made him blink. You don't see that often." That moment was shared, then reshared, then clipped for TikTok, stitched with captions like, "This is what confidence looks like." What Karoline didn't know yet was that a shift had occurred beneath the surface. Not everyone had agreed with her politics, but they couldn't deny her composure, her clarity, and the way she refused to be boxed in. Stephen Colbert, meanwhile, was feeling the heat from his team. Ratings hadn't dropped, but something had cracked. He was still funny, still biting, but the edge he wielded so easily before now came with backlash. At a writers' meeting, one of his producers spoke up hesitantly. "We've gone after plenty of guests before, but maybe this one backfired." Stephen didn't respond. He just stared at the whiteboard. In the silence, the weight of Karoline's final words echoed back. "You speak to get laughs. I speak because people like my father never had a microphone." The next day, Karoline appeared on Face the Nation. The interviewer tried to steer the conversation toward typical party talking points, but she gracefully shifted gears. "When someone tells you you're just a kid," she said, "sometimes the best thing you can do is show them what the next generation's really capable of." Backstage after the taping, a senior staff member from the show pulled her aside. "I've worked with senators, CEOs, even former presidents," he said. "But whatever that was today, that felt different." Karoline nodded. "It's not just politics anymore," she replied. "It's personal for a lot of us." That night, her team launched a grassroots initiative inspired by the moment. Just a Kid, the leadership series. Young Americans from all walks of life were invited to submit short videos telling their stories, how they'd been underestimated, and what they'd overcome. Within 48 hours, over 2,000 submissions poured in. From rural farm hands to inner-city students to first-generation immigrants, young people who'd been told they were just kids were now telling the world they were the future. And Karoline, once mocked for her age, had become the lightning rod for something far bigger. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was leading. A week after the interview with Stephen Colbert, Karoline Leavitt stood in front of a packed auditorium at Georgetown University. The stage wasn't lit for TV cameras or political rallies. It was set for something quieter, but more powerful. Behind her, a banner read, "Just a Kid, Leadership Series, Voices of the Next Generation." The room buzzed with anticipation. Students, parents, professors, even skeptical journalists had gathered to hear what this kid had to say next. Karoline stepped up to the podium wearing a sharp blazer over a navy blue blouse. The same cross she'd worn in the Colbert interview glimmered faintly under the lights. But there was something different about her now, more grounded, more dangerous to those who had dismissed her. She didn't start with a joke or a slogan. She started with a story. "My dad ran a hardware store in Windham, New Hampshire," she said, her voice steady. "He woke up every day before the sun rose, not because he wanted power, but because people relied on him. That's the kind of leadership I learned, not from a textbook, not from a stage, from grit. The audience was silent. No laughter, no clapping. Just listening. She continued. "When Stephen Colbert said I was out of touch, I understood something. It wasn't about me. It was about the idea that if you don't speak the way they do, or look the way they expect, or believe in what they approve, you don't belong." Her eyes scanned the room. "But here's what they don't see. We've built something stronger than applause. We've built a voice." She stepped aside and invited 3 young speakers to the stage. A 17-year-old single mom from Michigan, a former gang member who now mentored youth in LAA wheelchair-bound Ivy League student advocating for accessibility reform. Each of them shared a story of being told they weren't enough. Each of them ended by echoing her phrase, "They called me just a kid, but I'm not done yet." The room erupted into applause, this time not for fame or politics, but for truth, for resilience, for the quiet power of being underestimated. Backstage, One of Karoline's staffers pulled her aside. The numbers are insane. That video of you and Colbert? Over 18 million views. And this? He gestured toward the buzzing hall. This is bigger than we ever planned. Karoline nodded slowly. Good, she said, because I didn't come this far to clap back. I came to build something. Later that night, as she sat in her hotel room scrolling through messages, some supportive, some still mocking, she paused at one sent anonymously. It read, "You proved me wrong. You were more than ready. Keep going, Karoline." There was no name, no profile, but she had a hunch who it might have been. She closed her laptop and whispered to herself, "I'm just a kid? Maybe, but I'm just getting started." Surprising Stories had found not just a viral moment, but a movement. Some say strength comes with age, experience, or status, but sometimes it comes from being underestimated, then refusing to back down. Tonight, we watched Karoline Leavitt do more than just defend herself. She turned mockery into momentum, doubt into determination, and a late-night insult into a nationwide message. Because this wasn't just about Stephen's words. It was about every person who's ever been told, "You don't belong, you're too young," or "You're just a kid." Karoline reminded us that voices rise, not when they're loud, but when they're rooted in something real. If this story moved you, subscribe to Surprising Stories. Because every week, we bring you more than just moments. We bring you voices that won't be silenced. Surprising Stories, where the underestimated rise and the world finally listens.